I am blown away that there is a subreddit for what everyone is calling crawlers. I saw something many years ago that matches what is being described here pretty much exactly. I've posted about it in a couple of places years ago, kind of hoping that others have seen something similar, but no one ever seems to have encountered anything like it. A couple of weeks ago, I posted a very brief description in another subreddit, and someone there pointed me to this subreddit. I'll try to keep it brief. The time was in the mid-80s. The location was on an island in Grizz Ferry Lake, Arkansas, called Sugarloaf. It's a hilltop that sticks out of the lake. There's a trail that you can follow up to the south side of the hill to the top. I was with my girlfriend. I had a boat, and we had gone to the island to climb up and see the scenic view. We climbed to the top, looked around, and stared down. It was sunset, but not dark. Visibility was good. As we walked down the trail, we began to hear something pacing us through the woods. It sounded like it was 100 to 150 feet off the trail, and sounded like someone was walking through dead leaves and bush. We couldn't see what it was, but we could tell by the sound pretty much where it was coming from. We didn't really think too much of it until we stopped for a second and noticed that it stopped as well. When we started walking again, we heard it moving again. It really felt like we were being stalked. We tested it a few times by stopping and then starting again. It matched our movements every time. So in my mind, I felt like it was probably someone hiking or camping on the island and trying to have fun with us. After descending most of the way down to the shore, I was really getting kinda pissed off about it because it started to feel very creepy. I told my friend that I was going to try to see who it was and veered off of the path towards where the noise had been coming from. I've noticed for the first time since hearing it, it was no longer matching my movements. I couldn't hear any movements but my own. I walked about 100 feet off the path and I felt like I probably was close to where I had last heard the movement. This was in a pretty thick part of the woods. I stopped and looked around, not seeing anything. And then about 30 feet from me, I saw a figure run from behind a tree. It looked about 7 feet tall. It was an extremely thin humanoid shape. I would call it almost skeletal. Think of a very tall, long-limbed skeleton wrapped with very white skin, and that's pretty much a good description. It was running away from me and I did not see its face. No clothes, just very white skin. It was moving incredibly fast and disappeared into the woods in seconds. It was running upright, no crawling observed. I was stunned at the sight of it. I remember thinking, that can't be right, over and over. It was very, very unnatural. I wanted to run, but I could not even lift my legs to turn around. I was physically unable to take a step for 30 seconds or so, paralyzed with fear or shock, I guess. I finally was able to start back to the path, and I rejoined with my friend. We finally was able to go down to the path to the boat, and we got the hell out of there. And that's it. Not too much more to tell. It is the strangest thing that I've ever experienced. I've told all of my friends about this incident, but I quit doing it long ago because it seems like nobody believes it. I can't say that I blame them. If someone told me this story and I haven't even experienced it, I would have had trouble believing it as well. Today, someone knocked at my door and I opened it thinking it was someone from my parents, and the whole experience was odd. There was a short and oldest late 60s Hispanic woman looking down and holding some pamphlets, and a tall 6'4" Hispanic man with sunglasses and a cap wearing a leather jacket. He seemed strange since it wasn't even a sunny day, and he didn't even look at me when I opened the door. He stood a few feet back from the woman looking up at the siding. I looked back at the woman who was now looking at me, but still not saying anything, and then I noticed her eyes. They were light green with a hint of gray, and pupils with thin slits. I couldn't stop staring. I was frozen, not comprehending what the heck was I looking at. My toddler ran over to say hello and felt afraid and instinctively closed the door with just my head peeking, and she still hasn't said anything. Usually, Jehovah's Witness people would have started talking by now. Maybe she hesitated to speak as she saw I was uncomfortable. After staring at each other for what seemed like forever, I forced myself to break eye contact, and I looked down at her hand to see what exactly she was trying to peddle. They were brochures of pictures of Jesus, and she stuttered in Spanish that she wanted to make an invitation, as she flipped through the brochure in her hand but never actually handed me one. I would have taken it to be nice, but she didn't, so after a short pause, I politely said no thank you and I closed the door. I looked out the window and I didn't see them go to any other houses. They just disappeared. I thought that it was strange that they would drive to my neighborhood, knock on my door, and drive away without trying any other houses. For all I know, she was probably just a normal old Jehovah's Witness lady, but I've never in my life seen or heard of anyone with eyes like that, and I was terrified. Has anyone else seen anyone with eyes like this? I googled it and came across coloboma, but it looks nothing like what her eyes were like. They were literally thin slits. Contacts maybe? But that's weird for an old woman in her late 60s to be wearing cat/snake contacts. Good evening, everyone. If you happen to like our content, then please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribing is free. If you ever feel the need to change it, you can always do so. Make sure you hit the notification bell so that way you never miss any of our content. Now back to the video. I was just reminded about a strange guy I encountered while working at the register on a food truck near a government facility in New Mexico, USA. A little under 4 years ago, I was working a typical shift running the register on a fairly busy food truck near a government facility. We would average 50 plus customers for lunch and most were regulars, but we had a lot of new faces every day. One day, I get this very average looking white guy, nondescript. I couldn't pick him out in the lineup. He comes to the window and he asks, "What is this?" Unamused, I tell him, "Food truck, what do you want?" He looks confused and says something along the lines of, "What do you serve on this food truck?" I point to the sandwich board beside the window and wait. He glances at the board and asks, "What is on a hamburger?" Like he's never heard of it before. I list off the regular ingredients quickly. Burger, bun, choice of cheese, lettuce, tomato, onion, pickles, and a side of fries. He considers it for a moment, then asks, "What's a quesadilla?" Some people don't know what it is, so I tell him what's in it. He goes through each of the 8 or 9 items that we had and asking the same questions about everything. He decides on a burger, and I give him the total, and I think it was $12. He stares at me, then hands me a $20 bill and walks away. I send the ticket to my grill and I put the change aside for when he comes back for his food. I'd never assume a tip unless it was mentioned as such. He comes back for the food and opens the container and kind of stares at it in wonder. I offer him his change and he looks up at me like he'd never seen me before and walks away without his change. His tone was very deliberate, like he was trying not to sound weird. The accent wasn't foreign, but I couldn't pinpoint what region he was from. Southern, Boston, Midwest, etc. I've spoken to people from all over the world and I can usually pinpoint a dialect, but this guy was just off. So this isn't something that I've witnessed. I was told this story by one of the men who allegedly saw it. For context, this guy had a run-in with some questionable crowds and did what jobs he had to do to make some money at times, if you get my drift. So he has a lot of stories. I mostly consider this a tall tale, but there's still enough of it that makes me wonder, what if? According to him, we'll call him Zed for the sake of the story. He had been finishing up some work down in Louisiana back in the late 90s with his buddy, and had a few days to kill, namely to get some fishing and hunting in, albeit out of season. One of the guys that they had been working with gave him directions to the spot way back in the swamps and the marshes, or the bayou as it's more commonly called, that they can do without risking being caught by fish and game agents. He said one of the best things about this spot was that there were, oddly enough, never any alligators there. Bit of a red flag, that one. Anyways, One fine morning, they set out on their boats before the sun was up, navigating their way through the swamps. From what he decided, this was a section that was close to the Mississippi border, routes used by smugglers to move various products across state lines. They finally arrived at the spot after a few hours and some detours, turned off the boat, and started fishing. The trees were just thick enough to prevent you from being seen overhead, and they were essentially in a huge inlet that was somewhat sheltered from the rest of the bayou and had the start of solid land along two sides of it. By solid land, that also meant that you had to walk across 10 to 15 feet of muck that could suck your boots from off you before you even got to the solid ground. So according to Zed, the day was progressing, and fishing wasn't going too great though. But they still had beer, so they weren't inclined to go anywhere just yet. They both noted that, as the guy had said, there are no alligators. Normally you could spot them lurking around and sunning themselves, but they were just utterly gone from the spot, as were most of the big fishes seemed. It was at this point they observed a herd of feral hogs emerge from the undergrowth on the side of the lagoon and made their way to the muck to what they described before, and commenced to start rolling and rooting in it to their heart's content. Zed and his buddies slowly angled their boat closer, as they had sidearms with them and currently had no issue with getting wild pork instead of fish if the opportunity was there. The hogs were leery but not afraid, keeping the humans in their line of sight as they frolicked. Zed saw that they had no real way to get to the hog if they shot it there, so they just floated along and watched for a good opportunity. But instead, they saw something else entirely. According to Zed, that's when he saw the mud start to move. He knew instantly it wasn't an alligator, as an alligator would be flailing around in the mud trying to reach the hogs, and whatever this thing was, it was covered in mud. The only way he could describe it was something was pushing its way through the muck like a mostly submerged bulldozer, creeping up on the pigs. They watched as it slowly approached the cluster of hogs, who had noticed the movement but seemed more curious about what it was than afraid. One of them, a pig that Zed estimated was between 150 to 175 pounds, was the furthest out in the muck and made the mistake of attempting to sniff at whatever the intruder was. Zed said that quicker than they can react, something lunged out from the thing and attached to the pig's head and face. As the pig thrashed out, tried to jump back, letting out the most blood-curdling scream that you've ever heard. The thing was hauled partially out of the muck and came into the better view. Zed realized it was an alligator snapping turtle of proportions that he'd never heard of. He'd seen the one that they kept at the Bass Pro Shop that got big enough that it cracked its tank and had to get a new one, and he said that it was like comparing a chihuahua to a pit bull. It was still partially obscured by the muck that was covering it, but Zed swore it had a shell that had to at least been the size of the hood of a Volkswagen Beetle. He was an extreme car enthusiast, so he knew his vehicles. His best guess was it was well over 500 pounds, and now it was backing up into deeper water, dragging the pig with it. Zed said from what they could see, the turtle's head was so big that it was able to fit its jaws partially around the pig's skull, and its beak was now essentially acting as a meat hook. Apparently, it was a good 30-second fight to drag the pig into the lagoon, but Zed said it was clear the pig never had a chance. The turtle dragged it into the water, and the pig made one last desperate attempt to break free. Apparently, hearing something scream underwater one last time is as unnerving as you imagine, and Hollywood doesn't get the sound right. It then went absolutely quiet after that. According to Zed and his buddy, they just sat there for a minute processing what they had just seen, and except for the froth on the top of the water and the stirred up mud, there was no sign anything had just happened. The other hogs had fled as soon as they seen their comrade get attacked, and except for some buzz, it was almost completely silent. They couldn't say why, but Zed said they booked it out of there, that something was off and it felt wrong to be there. It wasn't like if they can go to the Fish and Game and describe what they saw, but they did fill in their acquaintance on why there were no alligators in the area. As far as Zed knew, no one else has ever seen this colossal turtle and came forward to talk about it. But Zed said that it was big enough if it caught a person that was unaware It could easily overpower and kill a human the same way it did that pig. Again, this is how the story was told to me. It's not my story, and I'm inclined to mostly believe it was a telltale, or an exaggerated one. But it does highlight that you don't need something as fanciful as a skunk ape or Bigfoot to be nervous about what might be lurking out of sight. Good evening, everyone. This is Yuri K, and this is the end of the video. Please leave a comment and let us know your opinions on the matter. If you happen to like this content, please check out our other videos. Make sure you like and share amongst your friends and family to help our community grow. You happen to be new to this channel? Please make sure you subscribe. It's free and you can always change it in the future. You have some terrifying story suggestions? If so, make sure that you send it to my email, fearofthedarkstories@gmail.com, and I'll feature it in a future segment. But you guys stay safe out there, and remember to always be afraid of the dark.